Today's video comes from Come to Reason Ministries, who I always think is kind of interesting. This video is about whether or not Christianity is brainwashing. Let's see it.
You know, it's not unusual for someone to become a Christian right after some very difficult time in their life. They're vulnerable, okay? But of course, this leaves them open to the charge that a person who's vulnerable is more open to being brainwashed, okay? So let me respond to that for a moment.
Okay, and we'll get to that, but there's one thing that I want to say here. Brainwashing is not what we're concerned about. I know that Christianity doesn't brainwash people, because brainwashing isn't really a thing that happens or works. What we're really concerned about here is indoctrination, or using manipulative means in order to get people to join and stay within a group, particularly one that is harmful or that you wouldn't otherwise consider.
What is vulnerability?
Okay, Google. Define vulnerability.
Vulnerability, the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally.
So, in this context, I would take that to mean open to the possibility of being harmed emotionally. Now, we could get into the argument as to whether or not Christianity is harmful, but that's a totally separate topic. But for right now, I will say that it is, because it teaches self-denigration. It can alienate you from people that you would otherwise love. It could cause bigotry against certain people, i.e. homosexuals. And it teaches you to all around not really care too much what happens to you in this life, with the promise that there will be a better one after this. With most forms of Christianity, you can waste your life away and just be fine with it, because that's what the religion teaches.
Vulnerability is a time in your life when, generally, the kind of circumstance we're talking about, you feel a lot of pain, a lot of anguish, and it causes you to ask questions about the world and look for answers for them in response to your anguish, okay? Now, is it unusual for someone to look to God in a moment of anguish? The answer is no. Of course, this happens all the time.
But the thing is, they wouldn't be looking towards a God in that moment if they weren't taught or preached to about the idea that you could. You're taught that God can give you answers to difficult questions, and in a state of vulnerability, you are told to look for those answers in God, and then you have to tie that in with the ideas about God, which can very well be harmful. So it seems like he's agreeing that, yeah, religion does use people's vulnerability to recruit people.
But do you have any idea how many people become atheists in the same set of circumstances? They lose a loved one, they encounter a terrible circumstance that assaults their life, they are anguished, they are vulnerable, they are looking for answers, and the answer they come up with is there is no God.
So what? Is your argument that, oh, atheists do this too, so it's okay? Because that's what we call a tu quoque fallacy. I'm not entirely sure how that's pronounced. But there's a couple of differences between people converting or deconverting in that set of circumstances. If somebody converts, then that's probably because somebody was preached to them, or that they were taught that that is the answer. And if they deconvert, then that's a sort of conclusion that they come to by themselves. It's an emotional decision, probably, but a conclusion on their own nonetheless. But also consider that atheism doesn't actually harm anyone. Now, you might argue that deconverting can cause distress, but that's only because of the dependency that Christianity teaches, as well as other religions. The fact that it's difficult to leave a religion is the fault of the religion, and another way in which religion harms you, I would argue. But anecdotally, I don't see a whole lot of people deconverting on an emotional basis. It tends to be a rational basis. But even if atheism was preying on the emotionally vulnerable, that doesn't mean you're not.
So some people during a time of anxiety and vulnerability see God as the answer to that, and others in the same set of circumstances see no God as the answer. Do you get the point I'm making here? The fact that one is anguished and vulnerable is not itself the deciding factor of whether what you believe is true or not.
But, Greg, that's not the issue here. The argument isn't that Christianity is incorrect because it's manipulative, it's that it's harmful. We're not talking about whether or not it's true here. But the biggest difference between Christianity and atheism in this regard is that Christianity teaches you to preach to the people who are emotionally vulnerable. Give them this empty promise that a God that they cannot see loves them, and that they should convert, and use that as an opportunity to convert people, whereas atheists don't have any such set of principles. In fact, atheists, I find, tend to have a sort of respect for people and their beliefs, and don't feel the need to go out and question everybody's belief in real life. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very argumentative on the internet, but I'm not going to go out into the public and tell people about the wonders of atheism and how everybody's wrong and how that they shouldn't be so emotionally attached to a God, because I know that it means a lot to them, so I'm not going to prey on their vulnerability in order to get them to believe what I believe, or what I don't believe, for that matter.
The fact that one is anguished and vulnerable is not itself the deciding factor of whether what you believe is true or not, whether you've been brainwashed or not.
Those two things are not the same. If something is true, then you can still brainwash people if brainwashing was a thing, but you can still indoctrinate people into a group that believes things that are true. But doing it by manipulative means is unethical.
That is always determined by something else. It's determined by the reasons. Are there good reasons when you're vulnerable and anxious and experience a tragedy to be driven to God as the only source of meaning and security? The answer from where I sit is yes. We give those reasons all the time, and I could elucidate them time and time again.
Okay, yeah, sure, you're an apologetics ministry. I get it. But you're kind of missing the point here. The reasons for why you believe something is different from the ethics of preaching that thing to the emotionally vulnerable. When somebody says that Christianity indoctrinates people, or brainwashes them, I guess, they're not saying anything about whether or not it's true, whether or not a person who is a Christian has good reasons to do so. They're just talking about whether it's right, the way they go about it.
Is there good reason if we go through anxiety and discomfort and hardship and loss to doubt the existence of God? Well, there I think you got a problem.
Yeah, the problem of evil. It's a pretty decent criticism of a all-powerful and all-loving God.
Because if there is no God, then there are no tragedies, no moral tragedies. There are things that we don't like. But how do we say that this is evil, or this is bad, or this is wrong, or it shouldn't be that way if there is no God to determine the way the world actually should be?
Because we're not psychopaths, most of us, and even those who are psychopaths can reason that other people should not be harmed. Whether or not there is a God, we can still very well see that harming others and being harmed is bad and should not happen. You get your morality from what your religion teaches you. That doesn't mean that everybody thinks the same way. The same way that we experience emotions, whether or not there's a God giving it to us, we can experience moral judgments, whether or not there's a God giving it to us.
So it turns out that this challenge, that when you're anxious and go through a time of vulnerability, that's when you're really open to being brainwashed about God, is an empty challenge because, frankly, it can go in either direction.
Yeah, we prey on the emotionally vulnerable, but it doesn't matter because you can become atheist in the same moment, right? We are taught to go out and promise a comfort that people need in the state when they are most vulnerable. We are taught to use that to recruit members and to use that to keep members into our religion, which may or may not harm them in the long run. That's not brainwashing or indoctrination. No, because you could also become an atheist in that same state of vulnerability. We're the ones preaching to you and trying to get you to join and stay in our group, but you could very easily not do that.
Ultimately, what matters for the issue of the soundness of our convictions are the reasons that back them up, not the emotions that might drive them.
Okay, cool, but that has nothing to do with the charge that religion is brainwashing or indoctrinating. We're not talking about the soundness of the reasons. We're talking about the ethics of the methods. I don't think that preying on the emotionally vulnerable to get people to join a group or community, and that same method to try to keep them in that community, I don't think that's right. And that's the point that I think you are missing. I'd like to take this time to point out that I am now on Patreon so that you can support me that way if you feel so inclined. Also, you can give me one-time donations via PayPal if that's your thing. Anything helps and is very much appreciated, but I also appreciate any and all of you who just watch my videos and enjoy them. So whether you donate to me or not, I still appreciate you just for being a fan.